a hunch and she asked Quince whether she had met any of the nobles that day, and Quince replied that she had rented out Carol to one of the nobles. Haru had a bad feeling and she asked Quince whether the noble that bought Carol for the day was by any chance Oliger, because she could smell some nobles going to the maze that morning, and that would make sense and would explain the attack by the worms. Ichinosuke asked Haru whether she could track Carol by her scent, and Haru wasn't sure that she could, but she was certain that she wasn't anywhere outside the maze. Ichinosuke thought for a moment, and if the worms were retreating, that could have meant that they were being attracted to Carol's ability, and if she were to come out from the maze, that could potentially mean that the worms would attack the city once again. Quince was getting really worried about Carol, and even though she had warned the nobles not to take Carol inside the maze, they didn't listen. She didn't know what to do, but she knew that she had to report that to someone, either the guild or the government. But Ichinosuke thought that his abilities should be enough to do something about the whole situation, and he told Quince that he would get everyone out of the maze without anyone getting hurt. Haru thought that she knew what Ichinosuke had in mind, and Ichinosuke explained that he would use his special wind magic, and he would use it in such a way to prevent any of the pheromones from coming out the maze. Ichinosuke asked Haru to help him, and she happily obliged, and Ichinosuke reassured Quince that everything would be alright and that they would bring Carol back alive and safe. Ichinosuke and Haru wasted no time, and they went immediately inside the maze. They got inside, and Ichinosuke was angry with the nobles because they thought that they could do whatever their hearts desired and not face any consequences. The guard at the entrance of the maze tried to stop them because he knew about Carl's ability, but he couldn't do anything against the orders of the nobles. Ichinosuke didn't really want to go in, but as there were several entrances and exits in and out of the maze, there were as many guards, and he didn't want to waste his time explaining the situation to each and every single one of them, and therefore, the easiest thing was to enter the maze and look for Carol. Ichinosuke was really agitated that he had to deal with nobles, but as long as they were in the maze, they hadn't encountered any monsters. Haru explained that the monsters might have been defeated by Sebastian because they probably entered the maze to level up in first place. Ichinosuke asked Haru about nobles so he could understand them better. Haru went on to tell Ichinosuke everything she knew about them. They could train and level up, and they could become holy knights or holy mages, but attaining those titles was really hard. Ichinosuke thought that they could maybe become a king, but Haru explained that that would be considered as a crime, and she warned Ichinosuke not to talk about such things because someone could only be born a king. Ichinosuke thought about why the nobles wanted to buy Haru, but he came up with his own conclusion. The same way he thought that Haru was beautiful, the nobles must have thought that as well, and that must have been the main reason they wanted to have Haru, but Haru was very happy that she ended up being bought by Ichinosuke rather than some noble. They followed the smell, and Haru was leading the way. Haru told Ichinosuke that it would be best if they didn't have to go past the 24th floor of the maze, because the mazes in the town of Bellasura had minotaurs inside of them, and they were really difficult to beat. Haru wasn't really concerned about encountering a single minotaur. The problem was that they could appear in groups, and if all of them were drawn to Carol's pheromones, that would be a big problem for everyone. As they walked, the scent Haru was picking up was becoming more and more clear, and she could even tell that there were a total of 3 people down in the maze, and one of them was probably injured as she could smell blood as well. Haru guessed that it was probably Sebastian, as he was the one responsible for fighting, and Ichinosuke told Haru that it would be best if they hurried. Ichinosuke was a bit concerned about whether or not the nobles were able to see healing magic, and he didn't even care about them dying, but that would probably cause a lot of trouble in the town, so he couldn't let that happen. However, as they were getting closer and closer to the scent, Haru was able to sense several monsters moving closer to one specific place, and that had to be where Carol was. Ichinosuke told Haru that he would handle everything from there, and Haru tried to protest as she wanted to take part in rescuing Carol as well, but Ichinosuke was afraid that the nobles might cause trouble if they recognized Haru. Ichinosuke reassured Haru that everything would be alright and that he would be more concerned if anything were to happen to her, Ichinosuke waved to Haru and he went further down into the maze. In the meantime, a large minotaur was running rampant. Oliger was terrified and he stood behind Sebastian as he ordered him to fight the minotaur. Sebastian obeyed the orders of his master, and as the minotaur threw a punch at him, he caught the minotaur's hand and grabbed it by the horns. Sebastian twitched his arms quickly and snapped the minotaur's neck and killed it. Sebastian's leg was injured and he was aware of the situation they were in. He took some time to think about everything, and it seemed that he had come up with a solid solution. Sebastian turned around and told Oliger that he won't be able to fight for much longer and that he would soon be in danger. Oliger thought that even if more monsters came to attack them, that Sebastian would be able to defeat all of them without many problems. But Sebastian said that even they got attacked by smaller and weaker monsters, they would be in big trouble if the attack came in a larger group, and Sebastian didn't even have to mention fighting against larger and more dangerous monsters like the Minotaur he had just defeated. Sebastian's face grew more sinister as he turned his eyes towards Carol. Sebastian suggested that they kill Carol so they could exit the maze safely, and Oliger wasn't really happy with that idea and he opposed it. Sebastian started yelling how he must go against Oliger's orders because his job was to protect him, and in his mind, killing Carol was the only way he could do that, and he was just about to disobey his master's orders when another Minotaur appeared out of nowhere and attacked him from behind. Sebastian was getting a bit annoyed at that point, and he turned around to Oliger to tell him to run away and find some shelter, and Oliger wasn't going to leave without him, so he grabbed Sebastian by the hand. That took Sebastian's attention away from the Minotaur, and his back was slashed by the Minotaur's axe. Sebastian started coughing up blood, but he was still urging Oliger to run away, but his master wouldn't listen to him. Even though Oliger was scared to death, he stood in between the monster and his servant to try and defend Sebastian, even if it meant that he had to lay his life. Sebastian yelled, and the Minotaur had already swung its axe, and all Oliger could do was close his eyes because he was completely frozen with fear. A slicing sound was heard, but Oliger opened his eyes. He realized that it wasn't him who was sliced, and he saw the monster's head in mid-air. In the very last moment, Ichinosuke came to his rescue, and his sword went through the Minotaur's neck like through butter. Ichinosuke turned around and asked Oliger whether or not he was alright. Oliger didn't know Ichinosuke's name, but he was aware that they had just been saved by him, and he wanted to thank him and to hire him to safely escort them to the exit of the maze. Ichinosuke felt a bit confused, and he took some time to think about that, and after a short time, he refused Oliger's offer, and Ichinosuke explained that he only saved them because that was along his way of saving Carol, and that was the only reason he came inside the maze to find and rescue her. Sebastian was still crouching as he couldn't get up from the injuries he had suffered, and he tried to warn Ichinosuke that Carol attracted the monster, and as Ichinosuke was well aware of that fact, he simply replied that he would take care of everything and they didn't need to worry. The very moment that they finished their conversation, a large group of Minotaurs ambushed Ichinosuke. Ichinosuke took an attacking stance, gripped his sword tightly, and he propelled himself towards one of the Minotaurs and killed it in one swift movement of his sword. Oliger and Sebastian couldn't believe their eyes. In what felt like a moment, Ichinosuke finished off 6 Minotaurs without much effort, and he turned around and scorched another one to death with his fire magic. Sebastian couldn't believe that just one man could overpower that many Minotaurs. However, Ichinosuke did have some trouble killing that many Minotaurs because their skin was thick and he needed to exert a lot more force to kill them. He needed a different strategy because his fire magic wasn't too effective as well. Ichinosuke thought that if he used thunder magic, that he would be able to stun the Minotaurs for a brief moment, and he was right. Ichinosuke wasn't too happy with the Minotaurs being paralyzed, but that was at least something. He told the others to go for the exit and he would be behind them in case the Minotaurs attack again. Olegure and Sebastian talked about Sebastian's injury, and even though Sebastian couldn't move his leg, he could drag it, and that's how he was able to walk. But Sebastian still wanted to kill Carol because he was afraid that monsters from other floors would attack them, and by killing her they could leave the maze alive. But Olegure told him that that was out of the question. Olegure also ordered Sebastian that he needed to stay alive as well, and Carol just stood there without uttering a single word. Ichinosuke was busy fighting off the Minotaurs, and he would love it if he could take some time to heal Sebastian's injuries, so he could be of use as well, but the Minotaurs weren't thinking of stopping anytime soon. Sebastian was leading Olegure and Carol out of the maze when Ichinosuke yelled out to them, warning them that the Minotaur was coming at them from the other direction. The Minotaur was raging with anger and it looked stronger than the others. It swung its large axe and Ichinosuke realized that he wouldn't be able to make it in time to defend them, and just as the sharp axe was coming down towards Olegure, Sebastian and Carol, a couple locks of hair danced in front of them. It was Haru, and she sliced off the Minotaur's attacking arm and injured it fatally. Olegure fell down onto the floor, and Ichinosuke was happy that no one was hurt, and he was happy to see Haru once again. Looking at Haru from the back, it seemed that Olegure was able to recognize her. Olegure was certain that the person who saved him from the Minotaur was the same person that saved him before. However, that wasn't the last of the Minotaurs, and another raging group was charging at the party. Haru had one idea, and that was to go down to the 25th floor, and Ichinosuke wasn't really sure whether that was an idea that would bring them comfort and safety, as the 25th floor was the boss's room. Haru explained that if they managed to go down and enter the boss's room, Carol's ability would be nullified and no other monsters would be attracted to where they were. Ichinosuke thought that that made sense, so he ordered everyone to make a run for the door that lead them to the 25th floor. Everyone managed to enter as Ichinosuke stayed behind to fight off some more Minotaurs in order to make it safe for others. Haru called out to him and told him that the gates were closing, and Ichinosuke started running as hard as he could because he knew that he was as good as dead if he stayed among the army of Minotaurs. Just as the gate was about to close, Ichinosuke managed to slide inside, and a loud thud was heard as the stone gates behind him closed. Ichinosuke was glad he was able to make it just in time, and he sat there for a while to regain some breath, but he was worried about everyone, so he checked up on them. Haru was a bit nervous because what she had done by coming down was disobeying her master's orders, but Ichinosuke was very happy that she did because she ended up saving not only him, but Carol as well, and he was glad she came. Ichinosuke thanked her and patted her on the head, which made Haru happy as well. But they didn't have time to take a proper rest because they were, after all, on the 25th floor, which was the place of the maze's boss, the Minotaur King. The Minotaur looked very angry and very strong. He was way larger than the ones they had been fighting against moments ago, and the way the Minotaur looked at Carol made Ichinosuke worried. Ichinosuke already knew that the boss would be a difficult opponent, but this one was looking quite strong. Haru explained that the gates would remain closed as long as the boss was alive, and they would never open from the outside if no one opened it from the inside. That made Ichinosuke think about whether or not he should try to take down the Minotaur as quickly as he possibly could, or whether slowing it down and killing it slowly would be a better idea. One thing was certain, and that was that defeating the boss would bring lots and lots of experience, and that would probably make Ichinosuke level up. But as Ichinosuke was inspecting the Minotaur King, there was something bugging him. He couldn't shake his thoughts from Olegure, and the fact that he was looking at him all the time since he saw Haru. Ichinosuke thought that Olegure was probably aware of the fact that Haru had a new master and that Ichinosuke was her master, but that wasn't the time to be thinking about such things, and Ichinosuke told everyone that they should find some shelter, and he asked Haru to help him fight the Minotaur. Haru was prepared, and Ichinosuke was getting hyped up as well, but someone tried to steal the spotlight. Olegure was already running at the Minotaur King, and he was provoking the monster by saying how Oligur Robuti from Arundel Kingdom would be its opponent, everyone was aware that Oligur stood no chance, and the Minotaur King knew that as well, and that fact made him even angrier. Ichinosuke and Sebastian tried to talk some sense to Oligur by telling him to stand back, but Oligur wasn't listening. Sebastian understood that his master wasn't going to move because he knew him the best, and Sebastian knew he had to act as the angry Minotaur was already swinging its axe at Oligur. Sebastian was quick to save Oligur, but he wasn't quick enough to dodge the attack from the Minotaur. Sebastian served as a shield for Oligur, but the boss sliced open his back that was exposed. Oligur's face was splattered with blood, and when Sebastian collapsed over him onto the floor, he realized what he had done. Oligur knew that that was his fault, and he was calling out to Sebastian to try and wake him up, but Sebastian took a blow that made him lose consciousness. But the Minotaur King wasn't stopping, and he was swinging his axe once again, and he was aiming at Oligur, who wasn't protected by anyone now. Thankfully, Ichinosuke was able to act quickly, and he sliced the Minotaur's arm, which made his attack miss completely. Ichinosuke knew that he mustn't let anything happen to Oligur, because he was a noble. Oligur wasn't even aware that he was being attacked because he was feeling guilty for what happened to Sebastian, and he was desperately trying to wake him up. Ichinosuke was aware of the fact that suffering such a blow from a boss could end up being fatal, and he also knew that he had very little time to try and heal his wound. However, the Minotaur wasn't going to let him do that easily, and the Minotaur released a strong growl, which normally would paralyze the victims, but somehow Ichinosuke was able to endure it and stand tall. But it took some time for Ichinosuke to regain his composure, and once he did, he noticed that the Minotaur wasn't standing in the same place from just a moment ago. Ichinosuke turned around and he saw the boss making its way towards Carol, who was both scared and defenseless. Ichinosuke started running to save Carol, but he was too slow. Nothing bad happened to Carol though, because Haru was able to get there in time to wound the Minotaur and save Carol from being killed, for which Ichinosuke was grateful. Ichinosuke took some time to assess the situation. He wanted to end the fight as quickly as possible, because he knew that it would only become harder and harder as time went on. The Minotaur King was way stronger and way smarter than all the other Minotaurs they fought, and that made it almost impossible for Ichinosuke to kill it with one strike, even though that was the one thing he would love the most. Ichinosuke came up with something, and he asked Haru to help him by serving as bait. He needed her to attract the boss's attention so he could try to kill it. Ichinosuke's plan was to scrape together all the power and strength he had left, because he thought that could possibly allow him to inflict lethal damage to the boss, and he would do all that while Haru acted as his bait, and Haru was happy to oblige with anything her master asked her to do. Haru's face gave off the feeling that she was determined which she was, and she started running around the place, provoking the Minotaur King to look her way. Haru quickly realized that it would be rather pointless for her to try and parry the Minotaur's attacks, because its axe was way too heavy and the Minotaur itself was way stronger than she was. When it came to strength, the Minotaur King was far more superior. Haru also knew that if she ran too far away from the Minotaur, it would simply turn towards Carol, and she couldn't allow that to happen. So the only viable option left for her was to try and keep the distance between her and the Minotaur King as small as possible, but she also needed it to be just enough that she could dodge its attacks with her head. Haru decided to use the flame sword that Ichinosuke bought her, and she would use it just to distract the Minotaur even more. After some time of playing cat and mouse with the Minotaur, Ichinosuke yelled out to Haru to move away because he was ready, and it was evident that Ichinosuke was putting everything he had into that attack. As there was no time for Haru to dodge to the side, she jumped into the air and Ichinosuke slashed the Minotaur beneath her. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen, but then the Minotaur King let out a grueling shriek of pain and blood started to gush out of its neck. It seemed that Ichinosuke accumulated enough strength, and his attack was enough to kill the boss. The large Minotaur vanished into thin air, and Haru was amazed with what Ichinosuke just did. Ichinosuke leveled up and he unlocked some jobs. Some of his stats were increased and some of them were maxed out. The fight was over and all that was left of the large minotaur were its horns and one hoof. In the meantime, Oliger was still worried about his servant, and Ichinosuke ran to see whether he could be of any help. He ordered Oliger to move and he immediately started applying his healing magic. Ichinosuke was able to close off the wound, but Sebastian wasn't regaining consciousness as he had lost a lot of blood and he was looking rather pale. Ichinosuke thought that the only way they could save him was if somebody offered him blood transfusion, but Ichinosuke wasn't sure whether or not that was a thing in that world, but his hands were tied inside the maze and they would first have to go out to try and save Sebastian. Ichinosuke was thinking about the circumstances that were present, and he knew that Sebastian was too heavy for anyone else and that he would have to be the person that carried him, but Ichinosuke couldn't allow himself to let Haru fight off the monster on her own, and it was then that Carol uttered her first words in the maze. She said that she would lure the monsters towards herself, and Ichinosuke was surprised to see Oliger stand in her defense. Oliger explained what he found out from Quince, and he knew well how Carol's power worked. The reason why the monsters weren't attacking Carol wasn't because they would never harm her. The actual way Carol's power worked was that her pheromones gave out a strong smell of a very attractive female, and that made the monsters fight off anyone in her presence. Oliger explained that if Carol wasn't defended, the monsters would try to propose to her, and when that wouldn't work, they would end up Carol. It was clear that Ichinosuke couldn't let that happen, and he knew that the only viable option he had was to take Carol with them. Ichinosuke still couldn't come up with a satisfying solution to their problem. He thought that Haru could potentially carry Sebastian, but that would end up almost impossible because Haru would also have to fight along the way. He also thought of the option where Haru would take Carol and they would go first, but that option would leave Ichinosuke worrying too much, so that as well was out of the question. The only thing that was coming to Ichinosuke's mind, which could potentially work, was that he used his jobless skills to change other people's jobs into ones that would enable them a safe way out. But one room was opened and Ichinosuke asked Haru whether that was the statue room of the lady, and Haru confirmed that it was. That didn't make much sense to Ichinosuke as he was able to detect 3 different beings inside, and Haru was rather confused because if there were living beings in there, there would be no way for the Minotaur King to spawn, but she was also able to feel the presence of 3 beings. Ichinosuke thought that the only way they would find out was to go inside and check. Ichinosuke went inside with hopes of finding a secret room that would lead them outside the maze, but what he had seen made him completely confused. He saw a guy and a girl and their horse all asleep and snoring. Ichinosuke started yelling immediately at them, and Oliger thought that for some reason they were Ichinosuke's friends. However, even though Ichinosuke did know them, he would never think of them as friends. Ichinosuke went to wake them up, Joffrey, Elisa, and Kentorus. Joffrey was able to recognize Ichinosuke's voice, and he was glad that someone had found them. Ichinosuke was worried, and he tried his best to make them stand up, but Joffrey was complaining how his stomach was hurting. Ichinosuke thought that they might have been wounded and that they fell unconscious like Sebastian, but it turned out that they were only hungry, and because of that, they didn't have any strength whatsoever. Joffrey explained how they got there 2 days ago and they had nothing else but mushrooms and grass to eat, and Ichinosuke was sad that he was so worried. Ichinosuke knew he had some stale bread and he stuffed it into Joffrey's mouth. Joffrey and Elisa expected to be fed, but all in all, they were happy that they were given something to eat in the first place, so everything turned out okay. Haru also came into the room and she was also surprised by the situation, but she was glad with the way her master dealt with everything. Joffrey and Elisa were having what was to them a romantic moment, and to everyone else, it was the cringiest moment of their lives. They were forcing the other one to eat first, and it wasn't too long before Ichinosuke snapped and yelled at them to eat at the same time. They ate the bread that Ichinosuke gave them, but Joffrey asked Ichinosuke whether he had anything for Kentaurus because he was also hungry. Ichinosuke did have something for the horse as well, but he asked Haru to feed Kentaurus with some carrots because he was afraid Kentaurus might kick him. Ichinosuke asked Joffrey and Elisa why they were there in the first place and how they ended up trapped in the statue room without any food, and Joffrey and Elisa were talking at the same time, which angered Ichinosuke quite a bit, and he told them to leave out all the necessary details, and he said that with an angry face and a scary voice. Joffrey said that they were trying to reach Bellasura, and that clearly didn't go as planned, and Ichinosuke once again repeated that he was only interested in their reason for entering the maze. They didn't really have a reason to enter, and they did so unexpectedly. Joffrey had stepped on Kentaurus' tail, which made the horse start running like crazy, and as he was about to hit a rock, the horse just passed through and entered the maze. The rock was like a veiled illusion, and Joffrey and Elisa followed Kentaurus inside, and they had discovered the maze. They roamed around, explored the maze for some time, and they even found some items which Joffrey excitedly showed to Ichinosuke, who wasn't amused, not even one bit. Joffrey explained that they stumbled across a room that had a sword which was stuck in a piece of stone. The sword had some writing on it, and what it said was basically that it mustn't be pulled because the sword was an evil item and therefore it had been sealed off. Ichinosuke was hoping that Joffrey and Elisa hadn't touched the sword, but his facial expressions gave off the vibe that he already knew they had. Joffrey went on to explain that they wanted to pull out the sword to give it to Ichinosuke as a gift, and Elisa added that the sword looked rather sad, being stuck and all. And just as they were about to touch the sword, the floor beneath them opened and they fell. The place they fell into was the statue room they were all in right now, and on top of having nothing to eat nor drink, they couldn't even go out as they couldn't open the door. Ichinosuke realized that if they had fell down, that must have meant that they came from up above them, and he looked above to see whether or not they would be able to climb that gap so they could avoid fighting all the monsters, but the distance was too long to climb, and Ichinosuke quickly gave up on that idea. Ichinosuke repeated to Joffrey and Elisa what they had just told him in order to see whether he understood everything correctly, and Joffrey and Elisa were a bit hesitant to tell Ichinosuke that he was right because they wanted everything to sound grand, and Ichinosuke made it as simple as he possibly could. Joffrey and Elisa thanked Ichinosuke for the food that he shared with them, and Ichinosuke was really getting annoyed with the way they acted, and he was certain that nothing good would come from trying to understand them nor their past events. Ichinosuke had to force himself to remain calm. The only good thing about everything was that Kentaurus was there, and even though there were not any other exits, at least Ichinosuke didn't have to worry about who would carry Sebastian. If Kentaurus carried him, that would make both him and Haru free to fight, and Ichinosuke thought that that might just be enough for them to fight their way out the maze. But another thing that might pose a problem was that they had Joffrey and Elisa to take care of as well. Olegur, who was there all the time, called out to Ichinosuke and asked him for his name. Ichinosuke introduced himself, but he was more interested in Olegur, suddenly asking him that. Olegur thought for some time and told Ichinosuke that he was okay with the fact that he was Haru's master. Ichinosuke was a bit surprised by what he had heard, and he asked Olegur to tell him the story of what happened between him and Haru. Olegur told Ichinosuke that when he was raiding a maze in Floorlands, he got into trouble and he was moments away from being killed by none other than a slime, and just as he was about to die, Haru was the one that saved his life. Olegur confessed that he fell in love with Haru and that she was the ideal knight for him, and Ichinosuke wasn't really amused with that fact, but what Olegur said next made Ichinosuke change his mind about him. He said that he wanted Haru to become free and that he wanted to spare her from being bought off by a master that wouldn't take care of her. and that would violate her rights. But as Haru had a condition that her master had to be strong, Olajur spent all of his time training, and his last resort was coming to the maze with Carol so he could improve his stats, but that wasn't really a successful plan. But not only that he didn't become stronger than Haru, he was once again saved by her, and it seemed that she had gotten even more power in the meantime. Ichinosuke observed Olagur with his skill, and even though his power couldn't compare to that of Haru's, he did manage to raise his stats significantly in a short period of time, and Ichinosuke was really impressed by the fact that he chose to do it the old-fashioned way instead of cheating. Ichinosuke told Olagur that he understood him, but he also had to realize that his actions weren't really thought through, because what ended up happening was that Olagur's strong wish to become stronger endangered all of the people in the city and in the guild. On top of that, Ichinosuke even thought that it was Olagur who pressured the guild into preventing Haru from being sold to someone else. Olagur realized what his actions had caused, and he was sorry about that, but he told Ichinosuke that it wasn't him who put any pressure on the guild and that he would never do such a thing. And Olagur added that he didn't have a problem with Haru serving Ichinosuke. Even though that did make him feel a bit sad, Ichinosuke thought to himself that Olagur wasn't all that bad and that he was quick to accuse every noble of being a douchebag. He turned around to Joffrey and Elisa and asked them whether they had finished eating and told them to quickly offer a prayer to the statue, because that might be the reason they receive a skill or an item they could use. Joffrey and Elisa didn't think why that would be a useful thing to do, and Ichinosuke was losing his temper with them, and he just rushed them to finish as soon as possible so they could be on their way. It seemed that Ichinosuke offered a prayer as well, and for a couple of moments he visited Torarul. Ichinosuke wanted some type of a blessing or a lucky item or anything else that would help him exit the maze successfully. Ichinosuke called out and looked for Torarul, but he couldn't find her. All he could see were a bunch of roulette tables and a note that said that Torarul was busy and that he should try helping himself. Ichinosuke was a bit annoyed that Torarul wasn't there because he also wanted to ask her stuff about his sister. But as he realized that he was on his own, Ichinosuke went over to the roulette tables and he was looking at the reward sheet. Everything seemed unusual, but Ichinosuke was regretting the way he spent his time. When he and Haru visited the casino, he would have loved it if he had played some roulette games, or if Haru was there with him. That would make his job a lot easier. Ichinosuke found 6 balls, which meant that he could play 6 times, and he couldn't see Sebastian's name anywhere on the board. And that was probably because he didn't offer a prayer due to him being unconscious. Before Ichinosuke started playing, he changed his job to one that had high luck stats, and then he was ready. There was no time for practice or warming up, so Ichinosuke decided that he would first roll for Olagur, as he didn't really care what reward he would get, and after the roulette finished spinning, Olagur's reward was a brush. That made Ichinosuke happy for a brief moment, and then he decided to spin 2 balls at the same time for Elisa and Joffrey. He rolled and the 2 balls landed on the same spot, earning them a rare medal, and Ichinosuke was satisfied with the outcome. Now he was going to spin the roulette for Carol, and Ichinosuke was slowly getting the hang of the game, and Carol's ball landed on a 1000 cents reward. And even though Ichinosuke would have preferred if she had gotten a skill, he was still happy with anything else that wasn't a brush. Now it was time for Ichinosuke to spin for himself, and he tried reducing the power of the spin to try upping his chances of hitting something good and good enough. He landed himself a skill which was just what he wanted. The very moment he got the skill, his Maze Explorer job went up a level, and the skill he had learned was Lifestyle Magic. Ichinosuke didn't have a clue what that skill might do or how it could help them leave the maze unharmed, but there was no time for that. He still needed to spin for Haru, and Ichinosuke focused all of his attention into that last spin. In the meantime, Torarul was watching Ichinosuke spin the roulette from her bed. She was too lazy to get up and do it for him, and she thought that Ichinosuke was getting a little bit Too fired up about the whole thing, Ichinosuke thought only about Haru before he threw in the ball into the spinning roulette, and after a couple of bounces, the ball landed on the number 7, which meant that Haru had gotten a skill as well, and Ichinosuke was extremely happy that he managed to land Haru a skill. Before Ichinosuke could see what the skill was, he was already back in the statue room where everyone offered their prayers and his party was checking out their rewards. Elisa and Joffrey were really happy with their rare medal and they chanted the words rare medal, annoying everyone. Carol looked at the bag of money she had gotten and it felt quite heavy in her little hands, and Olager was clearly disappointed with his brush. Ichinosuke asked Haru whether she had heard about a skill called Lifestyle Magic, and Olager heard him. Olager went on to explain the skill to Ichinosuke as there were maids in his mansion that could use it. Olager said that the main thing the skill could be used for was cleaning human bodies, and everything else for that matter. However, some people say that that particular skill had a hidden purpose, which was very special, and the reason behind that was that the skill could only be obtained after completing a very difficult maze like the one they were in. Because of the rarity of the skill was considered valuable, and the people that could level it up, which was very hard to do, had the potential of serving under the king himself. Ichinosuke acted amazed with what Oliger just told him, but he was a bit disappointed as he expected something else, which would come in handy in the maze, and Oliger was also sad that he had gotten a brush. It was time they started making a plan, and Ichinosuke went over to Joffrey to borrow from him his intimacy ring and to give him a monster repellent incense in case he had one, and Joffrey was happy to provide whatever Ichinosuke needed because he gave them food just moments ago. Ichinosuke turned around and he saw Haru all up in her thoughts, and because he had never seen her like that, he was rather surprised. Ichinosuke asked her whether everything was alright, and Haru snapped out of her head and said that she was okay. Ichinosuke went on to explain the plan he had come up with to Haru, and the plan was as followed. Before anything, he gave her the intimacy ring and told her to wear it. Ichinosuke said that he would take Carol and that he would exit the boss's room with her so he could draw the monsters onto himself. Ichinosuke told Haru that she needed to light the monster repellent incense 5 minutes after he and Carol left, and that she should head to the 23rd floor with Oliger, Joffrey, and Elisa. Haru tried protesting by saying how that was a dangerous plan and she wanted to serve as bait once again, but Ichinosuke reassured her that only he could successfully manage that job. Ichinosuke turned around to Joffrey and told him that he would be rewarded by Oliger if he allowed that they lay down Sebastian onto Kentaurus, and Oliger seemed fine with that, and Joffrey and Elisa seemed pumped up as usual. While Ichinosuke and Haru were telling each other to take care of themselves, Joffrey and Elisa somehow managed to carry Sebastian and lay him on top of Kentaurus. Ichinosuke told Carol to climb onto his back, and she was a bit shy to do so, but there was no other choice but to listen to what Ichinosuke was saying. She felt rather light, and Ichinosuke told her to tighten her grip as they would be running very fast and that they would soon be surrounded by all sorts of monsters. Before leaving, Ichinosuke once again told the others that they were going to meet on the 23rd floor, and with that, he and Carol exited the boss's room. As soon as Ichinosuke stepped out of the room with Carol on his back, an army of minotaurs was all over them and Ichinosuke had to dodge attacks every second. Ichinosuke realized that he had gotten way stronger since he had leveled up from the boss fight, and it was way easier for him to move around and to dodge the minotaurs' attacks. However, Ichinosuke was unable to attack because he was afraid that he might drop Carol along the way. So for now, he was just jumping from one Minotaur's head to the other. Ichinosuke was really happy with how everything had gone so far, and in no time they had climbed out to the 24th floor. When they got there, the place was swarming with Minotaurs, and Carol was afraid that they might not make it. However, Ichinosuke told her only to lower her head and to strap herself tightly as he was about to try and jump through a tiny gap just over the Minotaurs' heads. Ichinosuke crouched a bit to build up power in his legs, and he jumped so high that Coral almost hit her head on the ceiling, but they managed to jump over the minotaurs and pass on to the other side. Ichinosuke started running, and Carol warned him that they were going in the wrong direction, but Ichinosuke reassured her that he was aware of that and that he was doing that on purpose because he wanted to make it easier for Haru and the others. Ichinosuke ran for some time, and once he thought he had lost the minotaurs, his level had gone up. But Ichinosuke was a bit surprised that he was still using his playboy job from when he was playing roulette. Carol coughed as if she wanted to say something, and when Ichinosuke turned around, she told him to leave her behind as she didn't want to be a burden to anyone. At that point, the minotaurs have caught up with them, and Ichinosuke tried explaining that he was fine, but Carol had noticed that he didn't attack the minotaurs because he feared that she might get hurt. Carol said that if he only thought about her safety, it was inevitable that he would get hurt in the process. Carol once again asked Ichinosuke to leave her and to escape, and Ichinosuke asked her why she wanted to die so badly, and Carol was about to tell her story to Ichinosuke. Before she did, it seemed that Ichinosuke leveled up once again. Everything seemed to slow down as Carol started telling her story, and it went as follows. Her parents were killed by monsters, and Ichinosuke immediately realized that she blamed herself for their deaths. Carol said that it was only natural that she be killed by monsters as well, and Ichinosuke told her that she shouldn't blame herself but her skill instead. But Carol couldn't shake the feeling of blame she felt for her parents' deaths, even though she had no knowledge about her temptress skill. To cut the story short, the night her parents were killed, Carol was saved by an adventurer that just happened to be there by chance. Carol's dad was a hawker, and he would go around the country selling goods, but in order to start his business he had to borrow some money from the guild. When he died, the debt remained, and as Carol was a young child, she couldn't work, so all the goods went to waste and Carol became a slave. Carol thought that that was her punishment, and it seemed that she couldn't cope with that lifestyle anymore. She thought that everyone who had ever been in contact with her got hurt because of her in one way or the other, and she said how she would have loved if she had died with her parents. Ichinosuke could understand the way Carol felt, and he was about to tell her his story. He told her how he was also blaming himself for the death of his parents, and he proceeded to tell her why. When his sister had a birthday party, he planned everything ahead and made a reservation at one of the restaurants, but his parents had gone there before to prepare everything. He also prepared a present for his little sister, but in the meantime, his parents had gotten into an accident, and what should have been a happy day turned out to be the worst day in his and in his sister's lives. Ichinosuke blamed himself for the death of his parents, and he thought that his sister thought he was responsible, but it turned out that she didn't, and she was angry at Ichinosuke for thinking that he was. Ichinosuke explained how his little sister taught him a very valuable lesson that was true for all of Japan, and that was something they all lived by. She said that everyone had the right to try and be happy as long as that didn't harm others. That was part of Japan's constitution, and his little sister Miri would repeat section 13 word by word. Because of those words, Ichinosuke got interested in the constitution itself, and he started reading it, and after a long time there was only one thing that he could remember from it. That one thing was one code that said that everyone had the right to work, and that everyone was responsible for the work they did. Ichinosuke told Carol one more thing that his sister told him, and that was that it was perfectly okay to be happy, and even though he expected her to be sad on the day her parents died, she told him those words instead, and Ichinosuke completely changed the way he looked at life. To conclude his story, Ichinosuke said that he was 100% certain that if they could ask Carol's parents the same question, they would say that it wasn't Carol's fault. Even after that, Carol still didn't think she deserved to be happy, and Ichinosuke promised that he would do everything in his power to make her feel happy. He gave her a ring and told her to put it on so he could see her status bar. Ichinosuke saw the skill that made Carol lure in monsters, and as he had given her a ring, she became one of his party members, and that meant that Ichinosuke could change her job. Ichinosuke told Carol to take a look at her status bar, and he promised that that would be the first step in trying to make her happy. And Carol rubbed her eyes and brushed away the tears, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Normally, her job title would say Temptress, but now it said that she was a level 3 commoner. Ichinosuke explained to Carol that she was no longer a temptress, but they were still in danger of being attacked because they were in a maze after all. Carol knew that only high-ranked priests could actually change people's jobs, and she couldn't understand how Ichinosuke managed to do that. And Ichinosuke said that she could look at that as a divine blessing, and that her prayer was accepted, and that made Carol extremely emotional. While Ichinosuke was dodging all the attacks and trying to run away from the Minotaurs, he asked Carol whether there was any job that she had always dreamt of doing. He told her that she could ask for anything and that her wish would be granted, and he even suggested some jobs like a magician and a chef, and he even suggested she became a singer because the first time they met, she was singing a song. In the midst of battle, after giving it some thought, Carol finally uttered her wish, and she said that she wanted to become a peddler just like her parents, and on top of that, she wanted to be the best one ever. Ichinosuke was happy with her choice, even though he couldn't actually show it at that very moment because he was busy making sure that they stay alive. But he promised Carol that she would become a peddler, but he said that she would need to work very hard if she wanted to become the best peddler in history. Carol still had some doubts, and she questioned what Ichinosuke said about it being okay for her to be happy, and Ichinosuke once again reassured her by saying that she had to sacrifice her current self in order to become what she wanted to become. However, even though Ichinosuke knew that he shouldn't talk about him being jobless, he told Carol that he still hadn't decided what he wanted to do either, but that wouldn't stop him from cheering on Carol and supporting her journey. But if they all wanted to be happy, they first had to leave the maze, and it seemed that due to Carol's temptress skill not being active anymore, the Minotaurs became even angrier, and they certainly looked scarier. Ichinosuke told her to buckle up as he was about to show her what being jobless meant and all the possibilities it carried. The Minotaurs were barely on them, and Ichinosuke shouted out from the bottom of his lungs, urging Carol to live on and work for her dreams and happiness, and he added that he would do the same because of what his sister said about everything having the right to be happy. In the meantime, on the 23rd floor, Haru and the others were waiting, and they were hoping to see Ichinosuke and Carol come any minute. While they waited for them, Joffrey was trying to defend his bag from Kentaurus, who tried to eat it as the horse mistook it for food, and Olajur couldn't believe what he was seeing, and he asked Joffrey and Eliza whether or not they were always so unorganized on their adventures. The only one that looked worried was Haru, but her worry soon came to an end when she saw Ichonsuke and Carol running up the stairway. They rejoiced for getting together once again, and Ichinosuke told everybody that they didn't have to worry about encountering other monsters, as the blessing Carol received due to the offered prayer changed her job, and she was no longer a temptress that lured monsters, which was a complete lie, but no one except Haru knew the truth. Joffrey and Elisa were amazed by that, but they were so ignorant that they didn't know that that was practically impossible, and Olajur was baffled because that was the first time he had ever heard of such a thing happening. Ichinosuke told everyone that they shouldn't waste any more time and that they should head straight for the city so they could see to Sebastian's wounds and treat them, and Ichinosuke told Joffrey that he's counting on his monster repellent incense, which Joffrey proudly held in his hand. The party made its way towards the maze's exit, and Ichinosuke couldn't shake the feeling that Haru was bothered by something. She looked concerned, and Ichinosuke asked her whether her state was due to the skill she had received from the statue, and Haru said that it had nothing to do with that. The skill she got from the roulette spin was called Counterfeit Judgment, and it was used to see through fake items and to differentiate fake items from real ones. there was something else bothering her, and it had something to do with Carol and her skill to lure in monsters. Haru confirmed that Carol was no longer a temptress only after they had gotten to the 23rd floor, which meant that she was a temptress while they were in the statue room, and before she could continue, she was interrupted by Joffrey, who shouted that the incense was still active and that the smoke was repelling the monsters away. Haru continued, and her concern was the fact that Kenatoris, even though he is a type of monster, a slow donkey to be exact, it seemed that he wasn't drawn to Carol by any means, and now that Haru mentioned that, Ichinosuke thought that her concern made sense, and she was asking a valid question to which he didn't have an answer. Ichinosuke didn't have enough time to think because Joffrey and Elisa were once again making too much noise as they were trying to get Kentaurus away from eating grass. But once they understood that the grass came from a stone floor, they started celebrating that feat, and Olajur was slowly losing his mind, and he didn't think that they should trust Joffrey and Elisa. Ichinosuke told Olajur that they couldn't do anything about that situation because they needed repellent incense as they were still in the maze and they could get attacked anytime, but Ichinosuke did have an idea that could make things faster. Ichinosuke came up to Joffrey and gave him something that resembled a crown made of 2 carrots. Joffrey couldn't really understand what was happening, but once Kentaurus sniffed the carrots and picked up their scent, it was then that Joffrey understood what was going on, and he started running away while he was chased by his own horse. Elisa was cheering Joffrey on, and he told her that he was going to show everyone that he could find a way out in no time, and Ichinosuke honestly hoped that that would speed up the whole process, and Olagur was sorry for Sebastian, who was getting his insides stirred from all the running as he laid unconscious on the horse's back. After a while, the party had come into town, and their first stop was the Pharmacist Guild, so they could have a doctor take a look at Sebastian's injuries. Olajur went to talk to the doctor, and the doctor had good news for him as he said that Sebastian only needed to rest for some time and that he would be okay. Olajur turned around and he gave Ichinosuke and Haru a big bag full of money because they went through all the trouble to get him and Sebastian out of the maze, and Ichinosuke gladly accepted the gift. Olajur said that he would have been offended if he hadn't taken it, and he had one more thing he wanted to say, and he turned to Haru. Olagur told her that he was glad that she was finally looking happy and that he was very happy about the fact that she had found herself an owner who took great care of her, and that made Haru extremely happy. Olagur turned around and told Haru to stay healthy, and Ichinosuke told him that there was no reason for him to act so dramatically. Olajur once again turned around and he promised Ichinosuke that he would become stronger, and once he felt prepared, he would love it if they could have a friendly match to test each other's strength. Ichinosuke was happy that Olajur had a healthy competition in mind, but he just wanted to mention that apart from his wish of wanting to become more powerful, he should also pay attention not to hurt the people that surrounded him in the process. Olajur said that he would remember his words, and they bid farewell to each other. Ichinosuke and Haru got back inside to see what Joffrey and Elisa were up to, and Ichinosuke handed them the money bag from Olajur and said that it was for them, which made Joffrey and Elisa lose their minds from happiness. Ichinosuke explained that they would be returning Carol to her slave shop, to Madame Quince and Joffrey, and Elisa unanimously said that they would wait a little bit before setting out on a new adventure, and that they were going to get some delicious food to eat. Joffrey even said that they needed to eat first because the food that Ichinosuke gave them was really bad, and Ichinosuke was surprised that he could say such a thing after he ate it all. Joffrey even pulled out the 2 rare medals they had gotten from the statue after their prayers, and as they were rare, that also meant that they were worth a lot of money, and the 2 medals combined would bring them 60,000 cents, and they could have a feast with that much money. As they were celebrating, they raised their hands in which they held their rare medals, and something unexpected happened. Kentaurus swallowed their precious medals. Joffrey and Elisa were trying their best to make their horse spit the medals out, but to everyone's disbelief, the medals were gone, and so was the money that they could have exchanged them for. They were sad for a moment, and the very next moment, Joffrey changed his facial expressions, and it seemed that he was satisfied with that outcome as well. He said that even though their rare medals were swallowed just moments ago, he was satisfied with how everything turned out, because in the end, Kentaurus was responsible for everything as he did the hard work. Ichinosuke couldn't. Believe the roller coaster of emotions that was occurring right in front of his eyes, and Joffrey and Elisa were quick to forget about the rare medals as they had all the money from Olegur's gift, but Ichinosuke once again warned them to pay attention to the way they are going to spend it, because the last time a lot of their money had gone to waste. Ichinosuke, Haru and Carol said their goodbyes to Joffrey, Elisa and Kentaurus, and the two parties went their separate ways. Ichinosuke couldn't believe what a noisy pair of people they were, and he turned around towards Carol and he remembered what he told her back in the maze. Ichinosuke didn't forget his promise, and he was determined to keep it. He knew that he wanted to make Carol's life a happy one, but that meant that she first needed to learn some basic survival skills if she were to live on her own. And while he thought about Carol, his sister crossed his mind, and he had hoped that she was living her life in a healthy way. Ichinosuke turned to Haru as if he was asking her permission for what he was about to say, and it seemed that Haru could read his thoughts as she knew what her master was thinking, and she said that she would follow any of his orders. Ichinosuke thanked her, and that being the case, he turned back to Carol and asked her whether or not she would like to join them on their adventures, and that left little Carol speechless. Ichinosuke explained that they still didn't have a set goal and that they roamed the world so they could understand it better, and if Carol decided to join them, that would bring her a lot of experience points and a lot of knowledge about the world. Even though that sounded like a great idea, Carol was still a slave and she was aware of that, and that made her a bit sad. But Ichinosuke reassured her that she didn't have to worry about such things because Ichinosuke and Haru got enough money to buy her off completely, and even if they didn't, Ichinosuke told her that he had something called an item bag with which he could carry around all his valuables and any luggage she could potentially have. Ichinosuke also wanted to add that once Carol earned enough money so she could live on her own, he would free her so she could finally try and make her dream of becoming a top-class peddler a reality. Carol was clearly surprised, but she didn't know what to say, but Ichinosuke and Haru felt rather happy with the whole situation. Ichinosuke gave Carol a slight tap on the head and told her that she didn't have to carry that sad face around and that she could take her time to think about his proposal and that she could tell them her final decision later on as they would stay in the city of Bellasura for another day. Before they parted and went their separate ways, Ichinosuke said that he would explain everything to Madame Quince regarding the job change that Carol had gone through. When they parted, Haru had a question and she wasn't sure whether or not she should chase after Joffrey to return the intimacy ring to him, but Ichinosuke told her that there was probably no need for such a thing as they were probably going to meet them unexpectedly very soon. Ichinosuke and Haru made their way to Madame Quince's slave shop to explain everything to her. Of course, Ichinosuke couldn't tell her what really happened, but he told her the version that would satisfy her senses. Madame Quince was a bit surprised, but she also said that she had heard rumors of Lady Tororol changing people's jobs, and it seemed that that was quite possible. Madame Quince was clearly happy that Coral wasn't a temptress anymore, but she also voiced her concerns about her business, as Coral was the slave that had been rented out the most. Ichinosuke thought it was weird that Madame Quince said one thing, but her facial expressions showed something completely else, and Madame Quince was happy that they could tell that she was indeed very happy about Carol, even if that meant that her business was about to take a significant blow. Quince asked Ichinosuke whether he was willing to buy Carol off, and Ichinosuke explained that he would love it if Carol decided that on her own. Madame Quince wanted to make sure that Ichinosuke had the money she was looking to get for Carol, and he told her that if 100,000 cents was enough for her. He did have the money. Madame Queens thought that they must have gotten that money from cheating at the casino, and Ichinosuke immediately remembered Gorsa, the owner, and he thought that he must have told Queens what happened. But Ichinosuke failed to remember that Madame Queens never mentioned that she knew Gorsa, let alone that he told her about Ichinosuke and Haru, but she was only teasing him. Queens turned to Haru and told her that if by any chance something were to happen to Ichinosuke, she would have a secure job position at the casino because she was so good at it, but Haru simply told Queens that that scenario wasn't possible as there was no chance that Ichinosuke would die before Haru, as Haru thought of herself as Ichinosuke's shield and she felt very protective of him, and that made Queens chuckle a little bit. She wanted to ask Ichinosuke why he went through so much trouble to make his slave that invested in and emotionally attached to him. Ichinosuke said that he never did anything special and he only wanted to return Haru the same things she would do for him. She swore loyalty to him, and that's why he was trying to give back to her, and that was the whole logic behind their relationship. Madame Queens really liked his answer, and because of it, she had decided that she would sell Carol for 10,000 cents. Ichinosuke was a little bit surprised to hear that, and he honestly thought that that price was too low for a slave like Carol, and Queens told him that now, since she was a commoner, she wasn't even worth a lot more. But if Ichinosuke thought that he should pay more, Madame Queens had no problem with that. Ichinosuke realized that Madame Queens wasn't really cut out to be a slave merchant, but he told her that they would come back tomorrow to see whether or not they had a deal. Ichinosuke and Haru went back to the Adventurers Guild, and there seemed to be a big party underway. The old guild receptionist was annoyed with all the people that were celebrating the fact that they had gotten some money without much effort, and once he saw Ichinosuke and Haru, he thought to himself that they also came to collect the reward for the defense against the woolworm attack. Carol told Ichinosuke that she would go and collect the reward, and when she left, Ichinosuke thought to himself that such a festive atmosphere was okay, but he couldn't bear the strong smell of alcohol. While he waited for Haru to return, he was approached by two very drunk men who praised him and his efforts, and they even said that the commanding officer praised their work. Before they made another toast, someone from the crowd said that the reason behind the woolworm attack was the fact that they were in the middle of their breeding season, and Ichinosuke just nervously laughed because he knew the real reason all too well. Haru came back with a bag full of money, and Ichinosuke was quite happy with the sum they earned and with the fact that none of it would fall onto Carol, but Haru didn't seem to listen to him. Ichinosuke was about to exit the guild so they could do some shopping, but Haru fell head first, straight into his arms. Ichinosuke was rather surprised by this, and Haru lifted her head from his chest and begged Ichinosuke not to get rid of her once he bought Carol off. Ichinosuke kindly smiled at her because he knew that she was only feeling insecure, and all he could do was try and reassure her that he never intended on doing such a thing. Haru was worried about that because Ichinosuke was getting stronger every day, but Ichinosuke told her that no matter how strong he became, he would never get rid of her. While he held her in his arms, Ichinosuke realized that Haru was drunk because she reeked of alcohol. Ichinosuke asked the receptionist whether the guild had a spare room they could use so Haru could rest, and the receptionist showed him to the first aid room, and Ichinosuke carried Haru over to the bed. Once Haru was all tucked in, Ichinosuke came back to the receptionist, and even though he wasn't a drinker, he said that he would have one while the receptionist inspected another item for him. Ichinosuke showed him the nose ring from the Minotaur King, which was made entirely out of gold. The receptionist told Ichinosuke that normally if he bought it from him, he wouldn't get a lot of money for the item's value, but the receptionist was kind enough to write down that Haru was the one who brought in the item. The receptionist told Ichinosuke that the item was worth quite a lot, and Ichinosuke was happy to hear that because he wanted to treat everyone to a drink. The old receptionist told him that it was more than enough, and he asked Ichinosuke what he planned to do with the giant king meat, and Ichinosuke said that they could grill it and share it with other adventurers. The old receptionist told Ichinosuke that if he was treating everyone that he had to make a speech, and all Ichinosuke could say was that happiness arrived into town and utter chaos ensued, and even Ichinosuke ended up drinking like a drunk. Word quickly got out and everyone visited the guild, and all the money Ichinosuke earned from the nose ring was spent on paying for everyone's food and drinks. The following morning, Ichinosuke woke up and Haru was lying next to him and she was stark naked. Ichinosuke couldn't quite remember what happened the night before, but once he checked his status bar, he saw that he had learned a new playboy skill which could only mean one thing. While Ichinosuke tried to remember what exactly happened, Haru woke up and she told Ichinosuke that he was amazing and that they spent a wonderful night together, and Ichinosuke was a bit sad that he couldn't remember all the details.